Welcome again to the S.E.M podcast. I'm your host today, Zach Hewlett, along with Jack Bryce. And today we're joined by our friend, John Richardson. John, it's good to have you. What part of the world are you calling from today?
Yeah, great to be here. I'm from York in England.
Very nice. Well, John, you said you listened to one podcast, and I'm really excited to hear your take on how you're sharing your experiences. But let's just get started first. Tell us a little bit about before you got your mission call and life and your reaction of getting a call to Scotland.
Yeah, so I was really excited to prepare for a mission and to go on a mission. And at that time, it was before the mission age changed to being 18 for young men.
Yeah.
But in the UK, if you were 18, you could have an exception to go because of when university starts and how university works over here. So I was desperate to get my papers in to go almost straight after I turned 18, to the point where my dad, who was my bishop, wouldn't let me have my papers. So I went to the bishop of a neighbouring ward and said, "Hey, can you give me a set of papers so I can get started on these?" And my dad was a little annoyed, but it definitely got the ball rolling. So, I was definitely a studious preparer for mission. I was reading Preach My Gospel every day, really kind of putting a shift in. And I'll maybe come to this later, but I definitely feel like I was more prepared on paper than I was in reality. I knew the answers to the questions, not the truth of what I was going to be experiencing. But yeah, so I got my papers in, and for whatever reason, they took so long to come back. People get the mission call like 1 or 2 weeks now from when they submit the papers to getting a call. I waited for 10 weeks.
Wow.
That's brutal.
That's terrible. And it didn't even get delivered to my house. We were on holiday in Central Europe, and I was like, "Oh, Dad, how far away is Frankfurt, where the church office building was? I wonder if they've got my mission call." And he's like, "Oh yeah, I wonder if they have." And then we planned a day trip to Frankfurt, so we went into Frankfurt and went to have a look at the church office building. Quite a weird touristy thing to do when you're in Germany. And I was like, "Oh, wouldn't it be cool if they had my mission call?" And then someone that was there was like, "Oh, are you John?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she turns around with this envelope with my mission call. And I was like, amazing. So I had to go and collect my mission call in person.
Did she tell you that there was plans to send it to you from Frankfurt, or were they just holding on to it for the fun of it?
I think it was about to be sent, and my dad had made a couple of phone calls and said, "Hey, we're around. If we can collect it, we'd like to." So yeah, I would have waited longer had I have waited until I got home.
Oh my word, that would have been more brutal for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was then mad is that I had less than 3 weeks between getting my call and leaving for the MTC.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah, a real like pressure cooker story, but it was great. It meant that I didn't feel like I was waiting around. It really felt just losing my voice there. It really felt exciting to have that experience and then go to the temple, get on my mission. So it was great. Now, I think I might be your first guest that originally wasn't assigned to Scotland, because I was assigned to the island Dublin mission. And then a year into my mission, the missions merged, and so I ended up being in Scotland for the second half. Okay. But I'd always expected that I was going to go to Scotland because my maternal grandparents were mission president from 92 to 95, Ian and Anne Swanee. So I always expected a call to Scotland. I thought that would be what I got. And so I was not disappointed to not be going to Scotland originally, but I was quite surprised to get something that was different. And then when I heard the missions were merging, I was like, there we go. That's the hand of the Lord doing what he was always planning on doing and giving me that experience. So, quite an interesting and different story, I guess, to most people.
So timeline-wise, when did you actually enter the MTC?
The 4th of September, 2009.
Okay, so September 2009, and then you would have been home September 2011. Is that about right?
End of August, actually, yeah. Okay. So slightly under 2 years, as it is like a week before. So it was maybe the 24th or 25th of August, 2011 that I came home.
We'll count it as a full 2 years. It's fine, John. Don't worry about that.
Thank you.
So take us now to life since August of 2011. Tell us about what you've been up to since then.
Yeah, so I I started university in the September 2011 as planned. I studied law at Leeds Metropolitan University. Had no intention of being a lawyer ever, and so it was just a nice word to have written on my degree certificate. I then got a job in sales straight after university, where I used a lot from my mission in the interview process. You know, when they asked me why they should hire me over other people, I said, well, if I can sell religion in Scotland and Ireland, I think I'll be okay with your software.
That's a great pitch.
And worked for a great company for a couple of years. Then for about 4 years, founded my own business to recruit and train salespeople. And then recently, last January, founded a kind of new business to take that coaching salespeople to a new level with a couple of co-founders. And then the last few months has been a bit of an interesting one. I got diagnosed with leukemia in November last year, and so spent 6 weeks in hospital over Christmas, and then got out mid-January. And now I'm still in treatment, but everything is in remission and kind of back to work and back to normal life in a lot of ways. So yeah, quite a journey. And I completely forgot the most important thing that happened over those years. The year that I graduated university, I got married and started a family with my wife. So we have 2 little girls. So my wife's name is Madison. We've got 2 little girls called Quinn and Orla, who are 6 and 4 years old.
Wow. I can't even imagine. I mean, you just breeze through it so laissez-faire there, John. Oh, I had leukemia. Oh, and by the way, I have small girls. I mean, I'm sure your wife was in utter panic at that point in time.
Yeah, I definitely. So my one of my former bishops who performed my wedding came to visit me in hospital and said that I'll recover from this, but my wife will be scarred. And I definitely feel like that's true. You know, the last few months have been a blur for me. I don't remember all of the details when I was in hospital. I don't remember, the worst bits, quite honestly, whereas she was there watching it all and balancing. I was in Newcastle for a lot of the time, which is a 2-hour drive from where we live. And so those days where she's driving up and coming to see me and still trying to manage everything at home, we've been incredibly lucky with kind of the support system that we have around us. My parents live just over the fence, and friends and the ward have been fantastic. But yeah, definitely feels like a blip for me, but a scarring experience, I think, for my wife.
Yeah. Well, if your wife needs someone to talk to, she can speak to my wife, because she went through kind of a similar experience with me, and she still has those, as they say, PTSD moments where it's like there's little triggers that send her for a loop. So let's connect offline, and we can certainly match them up.
Absolutely.
And hopefully I'll help my wife get to know the British accents a little bit better, because she's rubbish, I can tell you that. Awesome. Well, that sounds wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I know I kind of drew it out of you a little bit, but I appreciate you giving us a little bit more context, John. Thank you.
Good.
So take us now to your original mission. Take us to the Ireland Dublin mission. I guess we can start there, and then we can go through areas companions and go from there. That'd be great.
Yeah. So I was trained in Bangor First Ward, which is in Northern Ireland, a small city about 20 minutes outside of Belfast, by Elder Watt, who is from Sunderland. And Bangor was a great ward, great place to be trained. We got fed all the time. My mission president, when I'd been there about 3 months, asked the question how often we get fed, and I said, well, 4 or 5 times a week. And he said, I can tell, you look like you've been eating well. So a really nice place to start. Then I moved to. Then I had Elder Bowman serve with me for my last few weeks in Bangor, before moving to Terranure Ward in South Dublin. Spent 4.5 months there. Spent 3 months there with Elder Johnson from somewhere in Utah, and then Elder Ellis, who's from Leicester in the UK. Then moved to North Dublin, spent 3 transfers in North Dublin with Elder Groneman, and then Elder Dodd, who was from Manchester in the UK, who I trained. Then the missions merged, and I moved over to Montrose in Scotland and served with Elder Boucher, and then moved down to Livingston and spent 3 transfers in Livingston with Elder Bowers, followed by Elder Singleton, and we had a transfer in the middle where we were a trio. And then moved up to Aberdeen and served with Elder Madsen for 4 transfers, and then Elder Bowles for my final 2 transfers.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, let's just start from where you started. Tell us a little bit more about your experiences with Elder Watt and your time there in the Bangor First Ward.
Yeah. So it's a really interesting city. It's probably, and I'll maybe get in trouble for saying this, it's probably one of the posher cities in Northern Ireland. It's very, a lot of the culture in Northern Ireland takes from its history of the Troubles and the Catholic and the Protestants. Bangor feels more level and a little bit outside of that. A lot of the kind of leadership of the Belfast Northern Ireland stake was in the Bangor First or Second Ward. A lot of them worked for the police, which is quite common for non-Protestant and Catholic individuals. And it was just a really kind of powerful ward to start my mission in. The members were great at working with us, looking after us. It wasn't just lip service from them. It was, really involving us. Most of the people I taught in Bangor were referrals from members. But finding was definitely a challenge. The one high street that wasn't big had preachers on it most days. And so trying not to get caught up in that and avoid being an easy target for a preacher to try and bash with made it a difficult place to go finding. And so we'd spend a lot of time knocking on doors, and a lot of people weren't in. So yeah, the most effective thing for us there was definitely working with less active members and members to be introduced to their friends, and to help some of the less active members to kind of engage and remember some of their feelings. Had some really powerful experiences with one family who one evening we were visiting. We visit them quite regularly, and different members of the family would be around. And my trainer really, really loved the people. He definitely, not that we didn't find, because he taught me really well how to, but he definitely focused on member work and really cared about the individuals and wanted to make an impact in people's lives. And so one evening we're with one of the sons of this family who was maybe 17, 18, 19 years old. And I'm sat there and it's 8:45, just a conversation about nothing. And I'm like, what are we doing here? Like, it's probably time to go home soon. So I check my watch. It's 9:00. I'm like, well, technically we could count this as teaching a lesson, but we're not really. Maybe we should go home. But I didn't say anything. And then my watch got to 9:30, and I'm about to say, right, we need to go home. And I'm thinking, what's my trainer doing? Like, why are we staying later than we should? And I genuinely heard a voice say, take your watch off and put it in your pocket. So I did. And moments later, the young man who hadn't been coming to church says, I've been reading my patriarchal blessing recently. And all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I know why I needed to take my watch off. I know why I needed to hear this. And so we talked about a couple of lines from his patriarchal blessing that mention dealing with the storms of life and having treacherous times. And he says, well, I feel like I've been in one of those and I probably need to pull myself out of it. And that Sunday he was at church, and within weeks was serving in callings and assignments, and just a really powerful moment of like listening to people and listening to the Spirit, and how the Spirit will tell you. I felt like Nephi, not that I was being asked to kill somebody, but being told not to follow the rule for a moment. Right. Was just a really kind of powerful experience that definitely set the tone of remembering that. And this is kind of what I was alluding to earlier, that it's not just about knowing the lessons from Preaching My Gospel. It's not about knowing the answer to the question. It's about working with the people and listening to their needs and helping them on their journey. So yeah, some really kind of powerful moments there that really changed my view on missionary work. That it wasn't just going out into the streets and finding King Lamoni and converting him. It was those like one-to-one experiences with individuals that I was looking to have.
Wow, that's amazing. And you're right. You're one of the many people that I'm sure had those experiences where the time constraints we were given as missionaries were subsequent to the moment we were in. And it's so important to read that moment and know if you're doing good things, or in that moment, it sounds like you were building a relationship of trust. And then all of a sudden it was like, here it is on a plate.
Yeah.
And, and you went from there, which is great.
Absolutely. It definitely felt like that line from Elder Holland where he's like, just listen. Just listen to what they tell you, and something they will say will tell you what you should teach. And it comes. It definitely comes.
That's so good. Fantastic. And then you had was it Brady Bowman?
Brady Bowman, yeah, it was. So he definitely was the other end of the scale in terms of like his attitude to the area, to Elder Watt. So Elder Watt was all about, we'll take the time with the people that we need to take the time with, whereas Elder Bowman was far more about, we've got work to be done. We've got things that we need to do, and we need to have our fish in the line. And it was a really kind of like leveling experience, I think, for me. It really, the two of them brought me down to that middle line of, it's about both of these things. We can't find the people we need to find if we don't do enough of the work. But we also can't be rushing out of those moments with people that matter. And it was a really short time with him. And so it definitely, like, the lesson for me to learn from Elder Bowman was keep your line in the water at all times. Because, you know, he was new to the area. I can't remember where he'd come from. But I was probably a difficult companion for him, because I definitely brought some like resistance of it. That's not how it's done in this area to the things that he wanted to do. And so a really like powerful, humbling experience for me, that as a young 18-year-old green missionary, I had no idea what I was really talking about. And he did. He'd been out for about a year and had some real success, and then continued to have success in other areas. So yeah, short time, but definitely a powerful learning experience for me.
I think that's always the challenge of the second companion, right?
Yeah.
There's a set way it's supposed to be done. So got to overcome that a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, you get so used to the regiment with your trainer, and then you're like, okay, I'm not used to this. All of a sudden it's just thrown at you, and you're a little bit taken aback at that, and you just kind of have to reevaluate and reassess and then put it all back together. It's like throwing the puzzle on the floor and having to pick the pieces up. So that's great.
Yeah.
All right. So from there you went to, tell me the ward again, in South Dublin.
Yeah. So it was Terranure ward in South Dublin. So definitely a world away in terms of location to where I'd been in Bangor. You know, we had at least 500,000 people living in just our area, and that was half of the ward area. So we'd walk out of our flat in the morning, and there'd be people to speak to that hadn't been preached to for the last 10 minutes as they walked down the high street. And that experience with Elder Bowman definitely prepared me, because with Elder Austin Johnson, he was a finder. He was an absolute demon. So we would every day, we'd never let ourselves schedule like lessons from 10 till 12 in the morning, because we felt like that was our prime finding time. So what we do is fill our pockets and fill our hands with Books of Mormon and just go out and speak to people. And it was, we can't go and have lunch until we've given away everything that we're carrying. And so it was a really like aggressive finding approach, where we'd sometimes be walking on opposite sides of the street just to like see if we could get ours out faster, make sure that we covered the most people, and just like trying the most bold invitations we could. So some days we'd be like, right, today we're inviting people to be baptized. And so we'd go out and we'd speak to people and say, we're inviting people to be baptized today. Is that something that you'd ever considered? And start conversations that way, which just led to some really interesting experiences. And we would be tracking every week, like, how quickly can we get rid of a box of Books of Mormon, just to kind of focus that that finding activity. And then in the afternoons and evenings, it would be about prioritization. You know, we found a lot of people that would take a first lesson, and some were far more kind of open to learning than others. We taught a lot of first lessons with Muslims who were so welcoming to us and so interested in kind of the similarities and differences in what we believed, but weren't necessarily wanting to be taught for their own spiritual journey. And so we had to learn to qualify, like, okay, what is a good investigator for us to be teaching, and how can we make sure that the impact of what we do has the right impact. And we also spent a lot of time with Brazilian members who were incredible member missionaries. So we'd learn like single lines of testimony in Portuguese, so we could just impress them in the first lesson with their friends, and then we'd teach them in English and they'd translate and all of that fun stuff. But yeah, it was probably the most fun time of my mission, just where we were having just such fun with trying new things, trying different approaches, and really trying to like unlock what the Lord had in store for us, and what we would see when we spoke to people. The irony is I can't really remember anybody that we taught that had a really powerful experience. The most interesting one was someone who we had a fantastic conversation on the street with, and she invited us to go and teach her first lesson. Felt like this is it. This is that golden experience that you're told you're going to have on your mission, where somebody's so prepared and ready. And then she calls us up a week later and says, can you come and visit me in hospital? So we go to the hospital, and it's a psychiatric hospital. And she pulls the curtain in her section of the hospital and says, you need to get me out of here. You're missionaries, right? You have a network across the world. You can get me out of here and get me to safety in another country. And we were like, don't think we can help you with that. That's not our bag. We have no physical power to help you. We can give you this book that can help you to find peace in your life, but that's about it. But yeah, we just had a real fun time, and some of the most powerful like companionship studies of our mission as well, where we read Alma in the Book of Mormon and would just talk about kind of what we learned from it and different things that those war chapters could be teaching us. So really kind of like I felt like my two companions previously had prepared me for that time to make the most of it and to have a really powerful experience there.
That's amazing. I love it. And then you had another companion there. Yeah,
Elder Ellis. So he was definitely a great teacher. I think I had expectations. He'd been out a lot longer than I had, and so I had some expectations that he'd come in and drive. And I think I don't know what conversations we had behind my back, but I think I was being given an opportunity to take control at this point. And so I first few days, there felt like there was a bit of a void. I think he'd maybe come from like a difficult place and was looking for someone to do what I'd had done to me with Elder Bowman and Elder Johnson. And so I just realized that we needed to flip the script a little bit and make sure we'd have lessons at 10 a.m. every day. So whenever we'd find, I'd be like, what are you doing 10 a.m. tomorrow? We can come and see you at 10. So we'd make sure we get out the flat. And once we were out of the flat, he was amazing. He was so good at just caring about the people, having different conversations. He could handle those difficult friends that you meet that really don't want to learn and want to challenge you. And he could handle those really effectively and say things like, that's not really why we're here. We're not here to debate. We're here to speak to people that want something different in their lives. And again, it was a short transfer. I think it was only 5 weeks, but really kind of taught me to lead and to take control, and that I couldn't let my mission happen to me. I had to make it happen myself. Again, something that I'd never really thought about before. I thought, study and preach my gospel, I'm studying Book of Mormon, it'll be fine. I've done the prep work. It should just happen, right? But that kind of practical piece, it was there that I really felt like, okay, I'm in control of this. I can do this. It's not just going to happen by default. It's not going to happen if I wait for it to happen, which was, a really kind of positive experience there as well.
Yeah, the thought that just jumped through my head was, in preparation for a mission, very few mission prep classes are about how to get your companion out of the flat in the morning.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure all of us had those experiences at some point, right? But you're right. Like those practical pieces that you didn't prepare for, the things that you have to learn.
Yeah.
The doctrine is there, and
Yeah.
you can go and do those things all day. But it's sometimes picking up a person who's dealing with depression or anxiety or all the different factors that come into just our the type of work we're doing. I mean, it's just so intense sometimes that it can overwhelm some people. So I can appreciate that for sure. That's great.
Yeah.
So from there, you went to a ward in northern Dublin, correct?
Yeah. So Finglas Ward, which is it was the chapel is literally on the mission office site at that time, and so I definitely felt like I was being put front and center in the Ireland Dublin mission. You know, this is the ward where you've got the most amount of people that live in the area. You've got, again, like a massive ward where there's lots of people that, you know, you never speak to, but lots of people that will really help and support. And I had 6 weeks with Elder Groneman. And this was the first time I was made a district leader. And he'd been a district leader. Like, he was a district leader when I was being trained. And again, at first I was like, this is why am I being made district leader when he's done this? He knows how to do this. And I was being trained, right? I was being trained how to do it. And he was an incredible trainer, just, you know, never telling me what to do, but just asking questions. Have you thought about this for what we could do? You know, what you're going to do for district meeting? Or have you thought about how you can help this missionary with whatever? And just such a, you know, he never once questioned that things that I was questioning, right? There was never any question in his mind as to why we were that way around and what he was there to do. And just, again, a really life-loving missionary where he was just happy to be there and happy to be doing the things we were doing. And really, like, that's where I really felt like we were teaching people that weren't members of the church, that could be members of the church, that we're having like a powerful impact on. There was a mum and a daughter who we taught where I kind of come in halfway, right? They'd been found, they'd been being taught for quite a while. And every time we'd plan for a lesson, I'd be like, what? Why are we teaching them this? Like, what? This doesn't feel like the next lesson in the order, right? This doesn't feel like the next thing they need to be taught. We just need to be saying, so when you get baptized all the time, is what I thought. And then when Kishwari decided to get baptized, we asked her why. We're like, so what's made this happen? She's like, to be honest, elders, fasting. And I'm thinking, what? Like, fasting? Of all of the principles that have kind of had an impact on you, fasting? And she's like, yeah, I know that if I fast, it's like a special prayer that gets answered. When I worry about my children, I fast, and I know they're being looked after. When I'm worried about what decision to make, I fast, and I get the answer. When I have something scary coming up in my life or in work, I fast, and it goes really well. So I fasted, and I'm ready to get baptized. And it was just like, for me, it was like, oh, that's what Elder Groneman's been doing. He's been helping get her to this point. And I don't know if he knew that or if he was just following the Spirit to kind of lead us to what to teach her. And at the time, we thought that she'd get baptized with her daughter, and her daughter didn't get baptized. But then in the last week of my mission, her daughter was on the list of names that got baptized. And she now lives in Utah. She's married in the temple, has a little family of her own. And so, you know, that kind of combined experience of going through that process and being there for that process, but also knowing that the impact lasts, right? And it's not always, we're not always blessed to see it, but it can happen afterwards. And then I trained Elder Dodd, and he was 2 or 3 years older than me. So like this theme of missionaries that are either way more experienced than me or older than me and have more life experience continued. And he was a really like powerful story. He'd joined the church as a child, and then gone less active really quickly. He'd come back to church at around 17, 18 years old, and his bishop straight away was like, so we're preparing you to go on a mission. And he said, okay, if that's what you tell me I'm supposed to be doing. And after a little while, he then got out. But he again was someone who just cared about people. You know, he'd share his experiences of how it was those one-to-one connections with his bishop, with his home teachers, that would help him see that there was more that he could have in his life. And I remember at times feeling like I was failing as a trainer. When there'd be things that maybe we disagree on, or things that didn't go quite how we wanted to, or there was one experience where I don't know if it was a zone leader or an assistant came on exchanges with us, and they went to see one of our investigators and invited them to be baptized. They said yes, did the baptismal interview all in one go. And after that, I was like, oh, why have I not been doing those things? Like, I'm supposed to be training this guy, and I've not taught him that. I've not got us to that stage. But then months afterwards, he called me up and was telling me how amazing he was doing on his mission and how much he was enjoying it. And I decided to go and look through my planners. And it was the most effective planning I'd ever done on my entire mission. Like, every hour to the minute was so well planned. I'd plan what streets we were going to go finding on. I'd plan like who we were going to visit at what time, how long we were going to stay, what lesson we were going to teach, all in my planner. And I was like, wow, actually, like, I thought I was failing, but it wasn't me. I was being guided, right? I was being told what to do and being shown what I needed to do with him. And yeah, he's a great friend. We haven't spent as much time in recent years together, but definitely like a really kind of powerful friendship was born there with Elder Dodd.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I have to give Elder Groneman some props, because we've heard the opposite end of that story, where previous district leaders serving with the district leader hasn't been as cohesive as it sounds like your experience was. But that's really awesome, and I'm glad that you're able to work well with your greenie and help him on the right track. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So then the missions merged, and
I'm really curious to hear your experience on this, because we've heard the Scotland side, but not the Ireland side, and it's always interesting to hear how that transition was. So
there definitely is a difference reflecting on it as a more mature individual than I felt at the time. And I can see that laugh and that smile must be coming from things that you've heard. So the cultures of the two missions were as far apart as you could get. Like, Elder Watt was very much an Ireland Dublin missionary. Elder Bowman would have probably been happier in the Scotland Edinburgh Mission side. And it was all the right intentions on both sides, but completely different approaches to everything. So as a result, it just meant that every time you had a missionary from each side in close conjunction with each other, there were just arguments about stupid things, like what counts as a lesson, right? Like, what counts as a lesson? What counts as a new investigator? What is a useful use of your time? And none of that helps you do the work, right? None of that helps you help anybody.
Yeah.
But at the time, it's like, that was not a lesson. I will not let you put numbers forward from our companionship that are not right. Like, I will not report that number for you because I don't agree. It's just getting caught up with so many things that just don't matter. And I remember saying to President Griffiths in my first interview with him, like, I've heard some things about the Scotland Edinburgh Mission that I'm not happy about. Like, who do I think I am to say something like that? Who am I to think something like that? And I can't remember for the world of me exactly what they were, but I just, like, in hindsight, I'm like, what an idiot he must have thought I was at that moment in time. Like honestly, like, why are you caring about these things that don't matter? And why did I care about those things that don't matter, right? I knew, I'd had the experiences to know what really mattered. And it wasn't what counts as a lesson. I should have been happy with anything. Like, it's a whole bunch of different things. But the only thing that, like, definitely does still stick with me is, and I feel really sorry for him. I can't even remember his name, but when the missions merged, one of the assistants from Scotland stayed and one from Ireland kind of stayed as assistants. And the assistant from Ireland had never served in Dublin zone, never been around the city. And as a result, like, that first transfer, half of the areas in Dublin closed.
Wow.
And so, wards where you've got like 500,000, 750,000 people, like a massive percentage of the souls in Ireland living in went from having 2 or 3 companionships to having 1. Whereas in Edinburgh, you've got 10 companionships in one ward, and it just felt like insanity.
Yeah.
And so my area got closed. So me and my trainee, our area got closed. And I think that as well maybe led to, at the time, me feeling like I'd failed. Like, I don't know if I've taught him the right things. I don't know if we've done a good enough job, and our area is getting closed. Like, what have I done wrong? And then I moved from Dublin, which is, again, most populous area in that half of the mission, to Montrose, which has like 3 people that live there. Like,
having served there, I can understand where you're coming from.
It's so beautiful, isn't it? Like,
It's a
one of the
beautiful
most
place.
beautiful parts of the world. And the members were fantastic. Like, people would come finding with us. It was so lovely a place to be, and so welcoming. But I definitely, like, again, at the time I didn't know this, but I was definitely depressed when I was in Montrose, through no fault of anybody. My companion was so good, Elder Boucher. He was so kind, and so not what I had expected from my first cross mission companion. Just like so loving and so compassionate, and all the things that I didn't expect to have. And he loved me through what must have been a difficult 6 weeks for him, of a companion that, seemed like he probably didn't want to be there, couldn't really like focus on anything, and was probably that passenger, right? That senior companion passenger. I don't think I can really put my finger on what it was. Probably a combination of feeling like I'd failed in Dublin, and then going somewhere where there was nobody to speak to, right? Like, I couldn't rely on the things that I'd done for the last 7 or 8 months every day to get me onto that track of, right, this is going to be a good day because I'm in control. Because we'd walk up the high street, and there'd be 3 people. Like, I've spoken to them yesterday. Like, what are we supposed to do?
Did you actually live in Montrose proper?
Yeah. So, right, like a 2-minute walk from the high street. And yeah, so like, I'm like, okay, well, if there's somewhere to find, this is a great place to find, but it really wasn't. It really wasn't. So then we'd spend days in the car, with longer drives between visits than we'd have in the visit with people. And so we just talked all the time, and it was great. Like, really nice conversations with each other, but just, yeah, really, really kind of difficult situation. And so, yeah, I got moved out quite quickly. Like, I was there 6 weeks. Elder Boucher had been there for 2 transfers before, and he was there for another 2 after, I think. And so, yeah, it was very much like a little drop for me there. And then I moved to Livingston, and Elder Bowers, so Elder Randy Bowers, he, again, I didn't realize this until months and months later. I was speaking to Elder Blackburn, who was one of the assistants, and he was saying how Elder Bowers is the dream junior companion. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, you can give him anyone who has a problem, who's struggling, who's having a difficult time, and it'll just make him work. And I was like, oh yeah, that happened to me. Like, I got moved to Livingston with Elder Bowers, and he just, like, day one, he's like, so we've been teaching a lot of lessons, but I don't think we've been teaching enough. So I want to break our record, which is 40 in a week, and I want us to do 60. And I was like, okay. Okay. So we went and we found 60 people that we could visit in 1 week and teach a lesson to. And again, most of them were like semi-active or less active members, investigators from the area book, because there wasn't great kind of public finding places. But yeah, we had, I think it was like 3 weeks in a row where we taught 60 plus lessons. And they were just focused. They were all about the individual, of how we helped them to have a powerful experience that day. And we got 3 member referrals that were just perfect, like perfect people to teach. One was a young man who was dating a member, and they were living together, and that was the reason that he couldn't be baptized, right? Like, he's like, I get it, I believe it, but we can't afford to move out. Like, we're in separate bedrooms, we're doing all the things we should be doing, but like, financially, it's impossible for us to do this. And so we planned this lesson where we were going to do a tour of the chapel with him that he was attending every week. I don't know why we thought that was going to be like a changer for him, but we do this tour of the chapel. We'd end in the baptismal font area, and then say, what like, how do we get you to ask the Lord what needs to be done? So we walk into the font area, we're starting to build up, and he goes, oh, I completely forgot to tell you, elders, we've been praying about what we could do to help me be baptized, and some money's come through that enables us to like separate for a little while so that I can get baptized. And if you're up for it, I can do it next Sunday. And it was like, oh, fantastic. Let's do this.
If you're up for it.
Yeah. Like,
fantastic.
bite your hand off, sir. So that was a really amazing experience. We had another one who just the classic, like, got introduced to him. He's like, this is exactly what I've been looking for in my life. Like, I've had some hard things happen, some rough family times, and you know, very quickly got baptized. And then another one who ended up getting baptized just after I left. But yeah, just a really I mean, the members in Livingston Ward are fantastic, to the point where I was thinking about trying to live there after my mission. Like, I just wanted to be around these people because they were just so warm, so friendly, so like hardworking in the gospel, both from their like internal attitudes to how they lived their life, but also to the way that they would talk to their friends. They would involve missionaries in everything they do. And so, yeah, it was just a really fantastic place to be. And then Elder Singleton came in, and we were in a trio for, I don't know if it was a full transfer, but a few weeks before Elder Bowers broke his ankle playing football, and we got football banned in the mission for a little while as a result of that. So he got emergency transferred. Even though we did have a car, he got emergency transferred. Maybe it was for some other reason somewhere else, over to Northern Ireland. And Elder Singleton is probably the companion that had the biggest like life impact for me on my mission. So we had this talk, and I can't for the life of me remember who gave it or like all of the details, but it was about sacrifice. And the principle was like, what do you know, sacrifice isn't doing the things you're already supposed to be doing. It's the stuff that is good that you give up for something better. And so we like reflected, and I was really loving like Mormon chapter 9 at this point in my mission around miracles, about the only reason they don't happen is because we don't believe. And we kind of like had this realization, this like epiphany moment of, why would everybody we're teaching not get baptized? There's two reasons. One, they choose not to, which we can't control. Or two, they're not supposed to, which God can control, right? Like, he's the one that knows the plan and knows what's supposed to happen. The only other reason is that we don't do what we're supposed to do, that we are limiting God doing the miracle because we don't live as we're supposed to, or we don't do what we're supposed to. So we looked through everything we were doing and found those little things that we could sacrifice. So one for me was I'd gotten a very intense relationship, got into a very intense relationship with Irn-Bru, drinking far too much of it all the time. And I had never drunk it before I moved to Livingston, right? Like, it was that area that I just found it, and it was bliss, golden bliss. And so I would drink like 2 liters a day. 2 liters a day.
Wow.
And, you know, like, talk about things that are addictive, right? There's no way that addiction was good for me. Not that you shouldn't drink things like Irn-Bru, like, it's fantastic, but 2 liters a day was far too much. So I cut that out. Like,
it was banned when we were there.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was a rule. Like, you couldn't drink it, especially in public, because everybody associated the caffeine with Mormons not drinking tea and coffee. Right. And so that was the main reason. But yeah, that's such an interesting differentiation of time. It's funny.
So yeah, I cut it out, and that meant that I had horrible headaches for about a week. But it was like, need to cut that out. We cut out those days where you just don't exercise, like where you just like, I'm going to pretend to do like a push-up and keep warm or whatever. So cut out, like, exercise every day. We had like an exercise bike, so we'd take turns on that for half an hour. I'm trying to remember like any other things, but just like everything, like our language, anything that we said, like those like soft, not swear words by any means, but like soft cuss words, we like, right, we can cut that out. We don't need that in our life. That's something that we can sacrifice. And then we changed our bedrooms around. We had this room that had mirrors across all of one side of the room. So we used that as like our wall room, where we'd write all of our investigators' names, how many lessons we taught, what our plans were for them, how we were going to work through that, and just had some of the most, like with Elder Johnson, I had these amazing spiritual companionship studies where I learned things. With Elder Singleton, it was, how do we help these people come closer to Christ? To the point where I went to a district leader council with just our zone. So there's the zone leaders and the other district leaders, and everyone's saying their goals for the month. And it's, 1 baptism, 2 baptisms in our district, 3 in ours. And I say, well, for us, for Livingston and Dumfries, we're going to do 18.
Wow.
And the zone leaders are like, what? yeah, we've got to go for 18. Do you want the names? And they're like, okay. So I read off this list of names, and it's one from the Dumfries elders and 17 from us. And the zone leaders are like, what? Like, I don't get it. I'm like, well, why would we believe that anybody worth teaching and actively teaching wouldn't get baptized? Why would we set a goal that is less than all of them getting baptized? They're progressing, so that should be our goal. And their response was like, I can't argue with that, so we'll put that down. A day later, I got a phone call from President Griffiths, and he's like, your goal is messing up the mission numbers because we're never going to hit that. And I was like, I know we're not, but I'm like, me and my companion are making the sacrifices needed. If we don't set that as our belief, what are we saying? We're choosing some of these people that can't have that blessing. And we definitely, like, me and President Griffiths definitely had some like conflict on that goal setting piece and what that means. And the reality is, like, of those names, the 3 people I mentioned were 3 that got baptized, which was fantastic, right? That's 3 more people than we would have if our goal was 1. And so the real lesson for me there was that actually, like, the outcome isn't the important bit; it's the impact on me and what I choose to, like, qualify myself for. And yeah, just a super, like, powerful experience for me of, like, do I really believe, right? Do I really believe what I say I believe, and am I willing to make those little sacrifices, those little, like, bits of slight disobedience or relaxed obedience, and make them deliberate choices that we made. And so yeah, we had a great time. It was just a really powerful few weeks that we got to spend together, living in that way and being really targeted with what we did.
That's amazing. Wow.
That's cool.
So from there, you went up to my other home, the Aberdeen area. Love that area. Were you actually in the Aberdeen ward? Or many people say Aberdeen and they're in Bridgedawn.
Yeah, so we were definitely Aberdeen ward.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a great ward, like a really great ward to be in. But I think I went in with a little bit of arrogance. Like, I'd come in from this amazing time in Livingston where I'd gone from rock bottom to the best I'd been on my mission. And so my first like correlation meeting, the ward mission leader's like, what are there's some things we can do? And I can't remember what I said, but I said something that was like, where's our faith? Where's our faith, brothers and sisters? Like, who do I think I am? Like, going in there and telling him what's going to happen. But definitely, like, got off on the wrong foot. And it was Brother Waby. Who I ended up being really close to and getting on really well with, but I definitely, like, didn't give him a good impression of myself that first Sunday. And he was just like, Elder Richardson, what are you on about? Like, I get that you're coming here ready to work, but, like, rein it in a little bit. Rein it in. Who do you think you are? So yeah, it was definitely a humbling experience to start with, and I served with Elder Madsen, who is an incredible person. I don't know if you've come across him. Hannah Madsen, definitely someone you should speak to. And the painful thing about this is that we didn't really get on, and there's no good reason that we didn't, other than probably my pride and arrogance. He was such a hard worker. He has some incredible kind of life experiences that would be really interesting for you to talk to him about. but we'd just clash again on stupid things, on, you know, whether it's okay to go into the flat at 5 to 9 versus doing one more lap and seeing if there's anyone we could speak to. Things like, should we go finding in the rain, or should we try and do something different, and having differences of opinion on those things. And, you know, I would say some annoying things, and then he would go and iron my shirts, because he was like, genuinely, there was no pretense about it. He was genuinely that good of a person. And so, yeah, we served together for a long time. I think it was 3 or 4 transfers. And I think, you know, we didn't have a lot of success, probably because of that kind of like conflict in our companionship, but we worked really hard. We definitely didn't let it affect what we did, just maybe the freedom of the spirit to work with us. And you know, I have nothing but respect for him. You know, it was definitely just like a clash of personalities or pride on my part that led to that, because he is truly one of the most admirable missionaries that I served with, and I haven't got a bad word to say about him, other than that I didn't make it easy for him, I don't think. So yeah, but we found well, we had some crazy experiences, really, where we'd be walking past a bar, and someone would be sat outside and would invite us in to teach them. And so we taught in a bar once. We went to visit someone that we'd found on the street, and then went to their home, and they were drunk when we arrived, and told us that they'd just got out of prison and that they'd committed some pretty serious crimes. And, you know, it felt like we were really there to just be a listening ear to some of those people. But what I found really hard in Aberdeen was the amount of times where we'd teach a first lesson with a family and have a really powerful first lesson, try and schedule the next lesson, and the husband would say, well, I'm going out on the oil rigs for the next 8 weeks. So
yeah, that was always a huge challenge.
Yeah. And you're like, I don't want to teach half the family and then, you know, try and make them to make decisions while the husband's away. But also, like, we lose the momentum if we don't do anything. And so it was just always a conflict there of, like, how do you effectively work with those families? But yeah, I had lots of those types of experiences with Elder Madsen. And then my last 3 months were with Elder Bowles, who again came from Kirkcaldy. He'd been in before and had some really amazing success there. Had been, you know, baptizing everybody, it felt like, in Kirkcaldy. And so I was really excited to kind of have someone with such a, like, recent pedigree. And he was just such a good teacher, like the most charismatic teacher that I served with on my mission. You know, most missionaries, most of us were average teachers at best, right? Like, we have no idea what we're really doing. We've learned these lessons and we're trying to teach them in a way that gets people to have powerful experiences. And you know always that the only thing that's made them stay listening to you is the Spirit, not because you did anything well. With Elder Bowles, he had a talent. He was great. He was so good. The amount of people that we taught, where I just felt like if this was me on my own, we'd lose them on the door. We'd lose them before we got to the right part of the conversation where they could feel the Spirit. And so, yeah, we worked with a number of people. I think there was maybe 4 or 5 that ended up all getting baptized kind of in the few weeks after I went home. But yeah, just some really kind of powerful, like, first lesson, second lesson experiences that we had in my last few weeks before I returned home. And you know, I definitely had a bit of a difficult time in Aberdeen, both with, like, dealing with coming off of that high in Livingston, but also my grandmother that served in Scotland herself passed away while I was in those last few months. And we definitely had a special relationship as well. And so that was hard. And the day after it happened, we were finding, and I spoke to someone and I was teaching them about the plan of salvation, like, you know, as you do, like, on the street, having a conversation. And I thought, I'll share a personal experience about how, like, my grandma's just died and I have this faith and whatever. And the person says, was your grandma Mormon as well? And I said, yeah. She goes, well, your grandma's in hell right now.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible.
Yeah, like completely unnecessary. You could have just said you don't want to speak to me, but like fine, whatever. So yeah, definitely had like a tough time in Aberdeen. But yeah, definitely like some solid experiences and some really positive experiences in there as well.
No, that's wonderful. Well, one of the questions that we pose to everyone is memories of your mission president and their wives, and you'll have to educate us because we have no idea who the mission president was in Ireland prior to the merge of the missions. But tell us about that mission president, and then talk about the Griffiths as well.
Yeah, so President Creer was the last Ireland Dublin mission president. He was a very big man. He was very tall, and he had a massive head, a massive head. So we talk about him being a little bit top heavy and like when he'd walk, but he was, the cultures of the missions feed so much off the mission president. He was such a kind, warm, like endearing person who talked really slowly, really deliberate in everything he did, and just really like cared about people. His wife, Sister Creer, was just this massive bundle of energy all the time. She would gush over you, over the things that you shared with her. I remember that first night in the mission home. She made us breakfast burritos for breakfast, and I'm thinking, I don't know if I'm going to like this. I've never had a breakfast burrito before, but it was delicious and just so kind. They were definitely like a bit older than the Griffiths, even at that time. They're both still alive now, but that like sense of maybe old schoolism in there was a little bit strong. Probably I'll say the worst, but it's not a bad memory. But like one of the most interesting memories I had was when I was in Finglas Ward. I went on exchanges with one of the assistants after a district meeting, and in the district meeting, I tried something different, and it really didn't work. It was a bit of a car crash. Didn't drive the right spiritual feeling I was hoping to drive. And then on the exchange, we were doing some service for a member, and every time I tried to leave, the member would like bring out another bit of food or another meal or another like item. And so I keep trying to leave. And then the member says, "Oh, well, we've got dessert." And this assistant's like, "Oh, great. We can stay for dessert." And I'm like, I'm trying to leave. And then he turned to me and say, "When are we leaving?" And I'm like, "You just said we could stay." So then about a week after that, I get called into the office with President Greer, and he's like, "So I've heard you've had some district meetings that aren't very spiritual." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know. I tried and it didn't work." And he's like, "And also that you're spending a lot of time doing service with members." And I'm like, "I've not done service for weeks. That's the first time." And it was a car crash. But yeah, but he didn't tell me off. It wasn't he didn't bring me in to tell me off. He brought me in to understand and to care and to just show an interest, I think. But yeah, he was so loving, and you could really feel that love. And we get I get messages, Christmas and Easter from them that are just really pure and loving. And then President Griffiths. So I think at the time I felt like he was the cause of the culture, but my sense is that he was picking up and actually trying to soften the culture maybe from the previous mission president. But to us, it didn't come across that way. It came across like, who is this absolute machine? Because yeah, I can't tell you anything that he did or said that promoted the culture that I felt like we were experiencing. He always showed an interest. He always asked questions. He always wanted to know how you felt about things, right? He was never a dictator. The question about like what music are you allowed to listen to, his answer was always, does it invite the spirit, and do you feel good about listening to it as a missionary, right? Like really casual is the wrong word, but really empowering, not dictative. I'm diabetic like he is, and so we talked a lot about that, and we talk about fasting and like how that's possible, when it's possible, and how to deal with things like that. Sister Griffiths was like, just again, so caring and so lovely. And yeah, there was not a there was not a bone in either of their bodies that that was negative or that I could put any criticism on. Which wasn't always how I felt at the time, right? Like at the time, and possibly because of other missionaries, there were times when I felt like there was, I don't know how to say it without sounding far more aggressive than I mean to, but just where there was a bit of a police state, right? A bit of a looking to catch you out and looking to find things out that they could then leverage against you or tell you off for. And what's interesting, I mentioned how I felt like I had a bit of depression in Montrose, and definitely at the end of my mission, I feel like I went home with depression. We had a UK and Ireland mission reunion last year, the year before, and someone asked President Griffiths the question, do you have any regrets? Like that's the question my dad always had before I left, like, don't come home with any regrets. Someone asked him and he said no, and then 10 minutes later he came back and said, no, there is one, and it's that there were things I should have known that I didn't know. And that was a really cathartic experience for me, because I'd maybe held it against him that he didn't know that I was going through depression. But how could he have known? I didn't tell him. I didn't tell him, and no one else told him. It was impossible for him to know. So why am I letting him feel like? Why am I letting him be the point of my frustration or disappointment there, when it's nobody's fault? He wanted to know. He was desperate to know how I felt and what I was going through, and had I have said anything that let him know how I was feeling, he would have been the warmest arms around me. But yeah, so I just definitely the last couple of years, I've really had a newfound love and respect for them, because every time I did need help and I asked for it, they were there. It was me not asking that was the barrier between us, or me not allowing there to be that relationship at times, which I think, I often talk about how a mission is the perfect analogy for our time on earth. We prepare for a mission, we go through those experiences, but then once we get there, everything hits us, and all of a sudden you forget everything that you did to prepare. And then you're trained, you have that little period of low accountability where you're trying to figure it out and you're learning what you need to do. And then all of a sudden you're unleashed and you have to drive everything yourself. And your mission president only knows or even if he knows, he can only help you when you allow him in, when you open that door, and when you don't put your pride between yourself and him. The things that I had a conversation with a missionary about a year into my mission who was going home, and I made some comments about little regrets I had, and his comment was, well, would you do that now? And I said no. And he said, well, why do you feel bad? You were only as accountable as you were then. The question mark is, how are you going to use your accountability moving forward? And so that really kind of shifted my relationship with previous choices in my life, in my mission, and what a perfect way to learn that if you don't be exactly obedient, the Spirit isn't with you and you don't achieve what you could achieve. I'd much rather learn that as a missionary in those 2 years as an early young man than learn that when I'm 45 and have a family, and the impact of bad choices is far greater than, I have an argument with my companion for a day, or, I don't find somebody that someone else will find next, because the Lord cares for each and every one of us. And so, yeah, just I have nothing but love for both of my mission presidents, for the men that they are, for the women that their wives are, and that would be my only my experience is that I didn't let there be relationships there as strong as they could have been. And that's on me. That's not on them. They were there. They were at the door. I didn't always open it.
I think, John, you're going to find, you're just discovering the podcast, but as you listen, you're going to realize that and have some cathartic moments that you're not alone in what you experienced there, of course. And I know we've talked to multiple people, and it's been helpful to me as well to hear other people's experiences. And like you said, we were young, and and dumb, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I can't say that better. Jack pulled that thought right out of my brain. I mean, as you listen to this podcast, the promise that I want you to make to me, John, is that you'll send me a message and go, okay, now I understand why the mission culture was this when I got there, and I'm grateful that it started to ebb and flow a little bit the other direction because of President Griffiths and his efforts there, because I can't even imagine what the mission looked like when he walked in the door. And I'm sure he was like, what's going on here?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I should have known as well. My granddad, he is Scottish, right? He grew up in the Orkney Islands and then Fraserburgh on the north coast. And so when he returned as mission president, he was so excited. Him and my grandma had talked about the missions that were available, and New Zealand was one, and they thought that would be really cool to go and be on the other side of the world. But when they saw Scotland, they were like, hopes and dreams, let us go there. And the mission president before, who I think was President McConkie, had been really focused on the Book of Mormon. It was all about the Book of Mormon is everything, and we should focus on the Book of Mormon. And my granddad's view was, these are Scottish people that are religious people. If you don't have the Bible with you, you're not getting in the door. And so, I should have known that there would be different cultures and that there would be different experiences, and that mission presidents bring and have to deal with all those changes. But yeah, I'm really excited to kind of catch up on the podcast and hear some of that. I think it's going to be a really powerful experience for me.
Yeah, I can assure you that it will be. And as Jack just shared as we've listened to this, we've learned the same things. It takes you away from the mentality that you had in your companionships, where you felt like you're kind of on an island.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden just brings it back into the greater whole, and you're looking at things in a different perspective than you had completely, and that makes such a huge difference. So I'll be very curious to hear what you have to say in the future, which is fun. One last thing is, we'd love you to share, shout outs. I'm looking at your companion list. We have not talked to any of them yet. And ultimately, we'd love any of them who came with the merger or otherwise to come on our podcast and share their experience. But is there anyone in particular that you'd like to call out or shout out to come on the podcast when you share it with them?
Yeah. So, I mean, any of my companions would be great guests to have. But the personal shout out is actually my little brother. So he also served in the Scotland Island mission about 8 years after I did. And he came home during COVID, actually. And had some fantastic experiences. I mentioned earlier my mission getting cut short a little bit. He's also diabetic, and so had his mission cut short by a few months because the reaction was, we can't have you out and about speaking to people when you're potentially at risk. But yeah, he had a very different experience to me in his mission. And so I'll call out Angus. Angus, my little brother, would be a great guest for you to have.
Fantastic. I love those family connections too. I mean, it seems to be a pretty predominant thing for those that live in the UK, especially in England, that come to Scotland. We've had quite a few family members that have all served in the same mission, which is fun.
Yeah, it's definitely a common thing that I've seen many times. But my other brother and my sister had very different. They served in Greece and Japan, so
wow.
not super consistent, but definitely two of us.
At least you get some. I'm not saying that it's all of them, but like you said, once in a while it happens that way.
Yeah,
very good. Well, John, just as a final thing as well, we just want to express to you our love. We're so grateful that you're a brother in Scotland. I know it had a roundabout way of getting there, but you are our brother in Scotland, and we're certainly grateful for you coming on and sharing your experiences with us today. So thank you.
Amazing. It's been my pleasure. I've loved it.
Awesome. Well, we'll certainly be in touch more in the coming days as we get prepared. This will go live later on this week, and you can share it with those that are ever so interested in hearing your experience. And I think that'll be great. But in the meantime, we'll say a hearty cheerio to you, and we'll talk to you more soon. All right, mate?
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
John. Cheerio, brother. Have a good night.
Hey, John.
Bye.
Bye.